First thing to say is good morning, everyone, and welcome to this York Economic Snapshot. It's the second instalment of our quarterly webinar series aimed at sharing the trends shaping York City Centre's economy, and that's with you, local businesses and strategic partners. It's great to see so many of you joining us today, more of you coming in by the minute. Just to clarify, this session will focus primarily on York's economic performance during the first quarter of 2026. So in this case, that refers to the first 3 months of the calendar year, January, February and March, which we're all aware is a typically quieter period for footfall and trade following the busy festive season. Just to let you know, the session is being recorded and we will be happy to share the video and the presentation slides with you all after the webinar has ended. So look out for that in your email. Without further ado, we'll have a quick look at what we'll be covering today. So we'll start by giving a brief introduction to the York Economic Data Hub project and the recent work that York BID has been doing around city centre data. We'll then take a quick look at the national economic picture, take stock of recent events and how these are affecting us and the rest of the nation. We'll then dive into the most recent insights for York City Centre, the reason why you're here, and explore the economic trends and identify how York compares to the rest of the country. We'll finish by giving a guided tour of our new data platform, very exciting, which offers you and the business community free access to the latest monthly insights coming out of the data sets we're going to look at today. And then we'll close with an open discussion where we'd like yourselves to put forward your questions and comments that you have about the data, and feel free to add your observations to that as well. So the session is expected to last around an hour if we manage to keep to time. And if you do have any questions as we go, please do feel free to pop those in the chat and we'll aim to address them at an opportune moment, whether or not they're burning or whether they can wait to the Q&A at the end. Today's session is being run by myself, Chris Bush, Business Manager, and Rachel Bean, Project Manager at York Business Improvement District, or BID, and that's alongside our guest speaker, Dmitry Moiseev, who is Senior Lecturer in Business Management at York Business School, based at York St John University. We'll hear more from Dmitry towards the end when we do the guided tour. But for now, I will pass over to Rachel, who is going to kick us off. So over to you, Rachel.
Morning, everyone. Hi, as Chris says, I'm Rachel. I'm the Project Manager at York BID. And today we're very pleased to introduce you to the York Economic Data Hub, an initiative designed to centralise York's performance data into a single and easy to understand platform. And as well as bringing together trusted data sources for the first time, the hub marks a significant investment in enhanced spending data to provide a comprehensive and in-depth overview of our city's economic health. And this is being delivered in 3 key ways: through our brand new and interactive online platform that Chris and Dmitry are going to demo for you later today, through a quarterly webinar series, and through a monthly insights report that are published directly to the BID's website. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this now? Historically, our city's data has been fragmented, making it difficult to capture a clear picture of visitor behaviour and the true impact of citywide initiatives. And this fragmentation has led to conflicting narratives and potentially damaging business and consumer confidence. So now, more than ever, we need a reliable data source to be able to respond to the ongoing uncertainty and develop long-term solutions for our high street, not only to survive, but to thrive. So our core objectives are to equip local businesses with actionable data you need for this strategic decision making, to provide robust evidence base to evaluate projects and strengthen the case for future investments, and ultimately to build a single and trusted database that reduces confusion over city centre performance. And importantly, this is a collaborative effort, so we'd like to thank the York Business School at York St John University, who are providing a dedicated data analyst to help us present this data in a way that's digestible and allows you to easily access the information that matters most to you. We're very pleased to be welcoming Dmitry to today's webinar to talk about that a bit more later. We'd also like to thank the York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority, who are funding this platform through the Vibrant and Sustainable High Streets Fund. And finally, we'd like to thank our growing network of contributors, including the City of York Council and Hospitality Association York, ensuring the hub serves the entire business community. And final thing from me, although we are launching the interactive database today, there is lots to explore on the York BID website. There you can find our back catalogue of monthly reports and watch the recording of our last webinar on Christmas spending to see the insights in action. And I'll add the link to the webpage in the chat. But now I'll hand over to Chris, who's going to take a look back at the last 3 months. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rachel. And now on to the picture of the national economy and this rather ominous slide of some of the headlines that we've seen in recent news articles, and I'm sure you're all too familiar with. And this is to help put York's performance into context. It's worth us first taking a step back and looking at what's happening nationally and how it affects us here at home. I should say at the outset, this isn't about painting a doom and gloom picture, but it is important to be clear and honest about the wider factors that are affecting both the UK as a whole and us locally, and it is indeed having an impact. At the moment, there's a surge in media coverage around global events, and I'm sure all of these headlines are familiar, but the day-to-day situations are evolving rapidly, and it's very hard to keep track of whether employment is up, down, whether inflation is up, down, and it's causing mass confusion. So it's fair to say in the current landscape, UK businesses are grappling with a complex web of economic pressures, and some of the key challenges that we thought were worth mentioning on this webinar are firstly the recent revaluation in commercial property alongside changes to national legislation has quite significantly caused business rates to rise. Some businesses, even small businesses, experiencing annual increases of 100% or more in what they pay on their annual business rates bills. Changes in employment law have made it more expensive and complicated to employ staff, and many of those have come into effect from April. And this is leading to quite a quick decline in some of the lower paid roles across sectors and a slowing of overall wage growth. Alluding to the articles, recent global events have demonstrated how vulnerable the UK is to national market shocks and supply chain disruption, which is ultimately responsible for driving up the cost of energy, fuel and commodities that we've seen just recently, but back in earlier months during the COVID pandemic and other conflicts around the world. And as a result, the Bank of England is revising its inflationary forecast for 2026, which was previously below 3%, was actually announced at 3.3% yesterday, but it is projected to be as high as 4% by the end of this year. And that in turn will have a knock-on effect on interest rates, which, if continue at a high level, will reduce incentives for commercial borrowing and investment. So what's the impact of these challenges? Well, I suppose repeated global shocks and the geopolitical instability surrounding events is dampening economic growth. And as I mentioned, the COVID pandemic, Russia's war on Ukraine, war in Iran, all of these global events are preventing the UK from recovering from economic shock. And that's why we've seen particularly slow growth in the last decade. And as slow as, I think, no higher than 0.3% at the start of this year leading into March. Also, profit margins are being squeezed and businesses are being forced to absorb rising costs, which is something I'm sure many of you are all too familiar with. And I think this is really key. A lot of this is being driven by economic uncertainty, both businesses and consumers pulling back and, which is resulting in less investment and lower overall spending. And then finally, rapid economic shifts are creating operational and strategic challenges, making it harder for businesses to adapt and plan efficiently for and effectively for the future. So just to start us off on a rosy outlook, that's to give an overall view of what's happening and certainly is having an impact here in York. And we'll now turn our attention to York's most recent economic performance and what the data is telling us in light of all of this. And we'll start by examining some of the spend data that we have. So this is provided by Beauclair and what we consider to be one of our core data sets. So this data set comprises of around 1.5 billion UK debit card transactions that's recorded annually, and represents around £45 billion worth of spend, which is approximately a sample size of 7.5% of the total spending in the UK. So not a really large percentage, but certainly a significant one. And the figures that you'll see that we're about to present are all based on transactions which have been made by customers in person at businesses which reside within the York city centre geography. Just a couple of points to note. The data is published monthly, and I'm afraid we can't really drill down any more granular in terms of timeline than month, so we can't look at individual days or weeks, but we are giving monthly summaries. One of the benefits of the data is that we have it back to 2022 in terms of historical records, so there's lots of data that we can make year-on-year comparisons with. And there are a couple of caveats to bear in mind that spend presented in these figures does not include anything to do with credit card transactions, online purchases, cash payments, or debit cards issued from outside the UK. So it is very much domestic spend made by debit card by in-person customers visiting businesses. Okay, so the first insight that we're going to take a look at is basically year-on-year performance across Q1, and that's across a number of different spending metrics. So figure 1 shows a comparison of the year-on-year growth, and that's the change in performance from one year to the next across key spending metrics in York City Centre in Q1. And we've got metrics for York and the UK benchmark, York on the left and UK benchmark on the right. So from left to right, the legend is color coded so that blue represents growth in sales, that's overall spending. Magenta is transactions, orange is customers, teal or green, whatever you want to call it, is your average transaction value, which is essentially just the sales divided by the number of transactions, and then average revenue per customer, which is in grey, which is the number of sales divided by the number of customers. So what we can observe from this graph is that customer numbers and transactions and sales have all declined significantly across both York and the national benchmark during Q1. In some cases, it's slightly more pronounced, and York has actually underperformed relative to the UK benchmark on a couple of these metrics, except for average revenue per customer, which is basically mirroring the national trend. So essentially, in summary, we're seeing spending reduced in York by 5.2% in Q1, but only 4.3% for the rest of the country. And I think ultimately what we've seen from observing this data is that the reduction is being driven by a decrease in customers. So the reduction in customers is leading to a reduction in spend. And you'll see YTD mentioned on this graph quite a bit. That stands for year to date, which you'll see alongside a number of acronyms and terms throughout this report and our other sources. There is a glossary of terms which is on our website, which we'll point you towards later, which you can use as a useful tool to reference some of these if anything is confusing moving forward. Okay, so on to the next view, which is a more granular view of the monthly insights. Figure 2 shows the total monthly sales trends recorded in the city centre from 2024 to the present month. And the data labels that you'll see represent the year-on-year growth in that month compared to the same period within the previous year. And we can see from, I suppose, left to right, the grey columns are representing monthly spend in 2024, orange is 2025, and blue is the recent months from 2026. And from this view, we can observe that March experienced the sharpest decline in monthly sales during Q1, which was down by 8.6%. But this was largely in line with the UK benchmark, which was actually down by 8.2%. So it seems to be a national trend that's affecting the city at that level. But more broadly, sales trends have shown consistent declines dating back as far as June from 2025. Which was most pronounced at a 10% decline, which after which was a relatively positive start to 2025. So there seems to have been a shift which was introduced at that point. So something that we're keeping a close eye on. Okay, a similar view, but for customers now. Figure 3 shows the total number of account holders which are linked to the monthly debit card transactions that we referred to earlier. And that's again dating from 2024 to the present month in 2026, and data labels showing year-on-year growth. So from this, we can observe that customer numbers have largely tracked with the sales trend shown in the previous graph over the last few years, but that these are the primary reason for the decline in overall sales. And yes, just to add that March 2026 again saw the sharpest decline of 7.3%, which was actually an underperformance compared to the UK benchmark of 5.5%. Right, so we'll move on to a slightly more granular view of sales, which is basically those top line metrics, but dissected into individual sectors. So figure 4 shows a comparison of the year-on-year sales growth across the 5 top performing sectors within York City Centre. And those are food and drink, general retail, fashion, which is uniquely kind of separated from retail in this case, and grocery and health and beauty. And this is across Q1. So firstly, to mention, the sector definitions that are included within the Beauclair dataset are defined on an FAQ document, which is also available on our website, and we'll signpost you to a little bit later on. But general retail includes businesses like bookshops, stationery shops, cards and gifts, department stores, discount retailers, electronic stores, appliance stores, pet stores, those sorts of things. So yes, we've got the York data on the left and the UK benchmark on the right, and we can observe that sales are significantly down across all 5 of the top performing sectors in Q1, both for York and for the UK benchmark. And I think that's what we would expect to see with such a steep decline in overall sales anyway. So there's no one sector that is kind of doing really well whilst all the others are failing. But we can see that food and drink in York is marginally outperforming the rest of the UK, which is a good news story. Whereas, unfortunately, retail, fashion and health and beauty are seeing much sharper declines. So food and drink at 4.9% down compared to the UK benchmark food and drink stat of 5.3% down. But general retail being hit really hard in York, down as low as nearly 10% compared to just 4% at the UK average. And then this is an interesting view of the share of quarterly sales by sector. So the figure 5 showing, total sales across those 10 sector categories defined by Beauclair in Q1. And we can quickly see that food and drink accounts for the largest share of total debit card spending, around 37%, sorry. And that's quite typical across the historical data as well. So that doesn't really change, which is, evident that food and drink is the biggest sector for in-person sales in the city centre. And then we can see we go down the list in terms of the relative size. Grocery is next at around 21%. Fashion and retail combined make up about 18%, and then health and beauty is nearly 8%. It's worth highlighting at this point that the figures shown here for tourism and entertainment are not really reflective of the overall sector performance, on the basis that much of their sales are actually based online. So in advance bookings and for attractions and hotels and those sorts of things. But we will be looking at overnight stay data a little bit later on, which will kind of indicate how at least the hotel sector is performing. Okay, then on to customer catchment and where customers spending in York come from. This is an interesting look at the distribution of quarterly sales by customers' region of residence. So the data labels are showing us the percentage share of total sales associated with customers from each region. And this is on a quarterly basis going back as far as 2024. And the legend is basically telling us that the blue stat columns are spend made by residents residing within the York local authority area. Pink is residents of East Yorkshire, orange North Yorkshire, grey West Yorkshire, green South Yorkshire, orange the northeast, which is a combination of areas within the northeast region, and then magenta is the rest of GB. We don't have any more kind of granular look at regions, but these areas are what we consider to be York's hinterland, I suppose. And what we can observe from this is that in any given quarter, between 35% and 45% of total quarterly sales are associated with York residents, which may be interesting to hear, may be, different to the rhetoric that you might have heard in press and, I don't know, social media, that York is just a city for tourists, but, nearly within a quarter, nearly 50% of total spend can be associated with residents. And interestingly, residents of North Yorkshire make up the second largest contributor category for sales, based around 12 to 13% on average, and that's typical of most quarters that we've seen in the historical data. Right now, a slightly more detailed view of the York resident spend, and this is an interesting one that we've been keeping an eye on for a while. Figure 7 shows the total monthly spending by customers residing in the York Local Authority area, as I've mentioned, very much in the same presentation as we've seen the sales graphs previously, with the year-on-year growth presented in the data labels. And this is showing, quite worryingly, I suppose, a monthly trend of consistent decline in resident spending, which begins as far back as 2024 and is continuing to decline into 2026. So the trends are tracking largely with the changes in overall sales. So you would expect these to ebb and flow with the sales trends. But these are slightly more pronounced than what we're seeing in the sales, which means that there is a bit of pullback from residents over time. And just to highlight that the year-to-date resident spend for the end of March is down 6.6% compared to the previous year. And that's compared, that's a further decline from what we saw at the end of 2025, by the end of December, which was around 6.3%. So it does feel as though it's pulling further in that direction, looking at this data. Okay, so moving on to our next data source. As you can tell, we've got quite a bit to go on to get through, but there isn't lots more graphs to show you. We'll try not to kill you by PowerPoint, but hopefully all of these will be useful to you in some way. So this is to look at visitor insights, and in particular data that's been provided by City of York Council through their recently purchased BT Active Intelligence license. So this offers us a much richer and more dynamic source of data on visitor mobility, how many people come to the city, how they behave when they're here. And so this is capturing anonymized device signals from mobile devices across the BT and EE phone networks. So it's anyone with a phone on those networks that's switched on coming into the York area. So it's a massive sample size of around 24 million devices a year recorded, which I think is probably BT's strength compared to other competitors, offering these kinds of insights. And from that data, we can derive things like footfall, dwell time, peak hours of visitation, and visitor demographics and home locations as well. The downside is that we only have historical data, as far back as October 2024, so there isn't yet a full year's worth to make year-on-year comparisons with, and across that limited time frame. But these insights are available by the hour and by the day, so there is a potential there to do more bespoke reporting around things like events, which we've played with a little bit so far, but we're hoping to do more within the future. So, for instance, how did the Christmas market perform, rather than just looking at the month that it took place, and we can actually look at the specific dates. So diving into the data, very much a similar view to what you've seen before. Figure 8 shows the monthly total of cumulative daily visitors to York City Centre. So that's how many visits per day added up over the month from October 2024 to the present. And you can see that there's gaps in the year-on-year comparisons because there are areas where we cannot compare. We don't have data to do so. I think ultimately what we can derive from this is that year-to-date footfall is down for the quarter by 7.6%. March is the worst affected month, down by 11.9% compared to 2025. And I suppose this data is largely tracking with what we're seeing in the sales and customer trends from Beauclair, which is a positive, but obviously it's not a very positive outlook of footfall being attracted to the city. So another one that we're going to keep an eye on moving forward. But I suppose to highlight that this is what I would like to think a more comprehensive and reliable view of footfall than we're getting from other sources, namely, the MRI Springboard footfall counters, which are in Parliament Street and Micklegate. We've understood for the last year that those, particularly the Parliament Street camera, has been malfunctioning, and despite being repaired, it's continuing to record significantly lower levels of footfall, in some cases as low as 50%, which I think, from our perspective, we don't consider to be accurate. I struggle to understand how York could be down by that much. So we've actually made a decision to remove MRI from our public reporting moving forward, and we're shifting to relying on BT to give us those indicators of footfall. And I think, rather than dictating, we would just encourage those on the call to do similar, scrutinize what you're reading in terms of a Springboard report compared to what BT is showing you in terms of footfall. This data is available on the Data Hub, and it's also being made available on the York Open Data portal in the Council's Movement and Place reports, which are published monthly as well. So go and check those out when you have time. Okay, and another view of the BT data is monthly dwell time. So sorry, I've written monthly dwell time, but this is actually quarterly dwell time. So that's a mistake on my part. But essentially, this graph is showing us the percentage distribution of visitors to York by dwell time in minutes during Q1. And just to know that any visitors who have been seen in the area for less than 10 minutes are excluded on the basis that they could be in a vehicle or they're not actually dwelling, they're just moving through. And the data is essentially telling us that a substantial portion of visitors dwell for more than 2 hours. These figures in the historical data tend not to change too much. It's more like a variation of 1 to 2%. So this is giving us a kind of longer term profile of how visitors behave when they come to the city. I'm afraid we don't have an awful lot of time to get into the more granular end of BT Active at the moment, but we will endeavour to go into more detail in future webinars, and there is more that you can explore on our website and on York Open Data as well. Right, okay, the next data set we will look at is for overnight stays, specifically performance around hotels and serviced accommodation. This is often referred to by the industry as STR data. It's essentially performance data that's collected directly from hotels, then anonymized and summarized into monthly figures. The key metrics are hotel occupancy, which is calculated by working out the average numbers of rooms sold compared to the total stock that's available, and then the average daily rate, which is the average revenue earned by hotels per room that is occupied over a specific period. And this data is provided to us by the Hospitality Association York Group, commonly known as HAY, who we're very thankful for to have the data, and we're classing as key contributors in this project. So thanks very much to Stefan and Indra for supporting us through getting this project off the ground. And just to highlight, both those metrics that I mentioned, figure 10 shows the average monthly percentage of available rooms occupied across hotels and serviced accommodation. And this is citywide for York rather than just city centre, from as far back as 2024 to the present month. And again, data labels are showing the year-on-year growth. Quite an interesting story in light of what we've been showing you earlier. This is quite a positive outlook. So average hotel occupancy for Q1 has actually risen to around 84%. That's a substantial year-on-year increase of 11.7 percentage points in total compared with the previous year. And these are actually the highest occupancy levels that we've seen for hotels since 2024. So, a completely different view compared to sort of the debit card sales, and very good to know. Then I suppose the other half of the story to that metric is the average daily rate. So this is the rate charged per room across hotels and serviced accommodations citywide over the same period. And in this, we can observe that during Q1, the average day rate stood at around £103.57, which represents a year-on-year decline of about 4.5%. So that indicates potentially that the increase in occupancy is actually being driven by a price strategy, and low prices are incentivizing customers to come and stay in hotels at quieter times of year traditionally, and that strategy is working. So a really interesting one there, and one that we'll keep a close eye on moving forward as well. And the final data set we're going to look at today is around shop vacancy, which essentially is a measure of the number of unoccupied commercial units in York, in our case, York City Centre, and that's expressed as a percentage of the total units that are available. So the data set that we're about to show you is available on the York Open Data portal, and it is published on a monthly basis. So we can see there monthly shop vacancy rates from as far back as 2024, the average rate within any given month. The grey line representing 2024, beginning to decline after the highs that we saw due to a lack of demand during COVID and the fallout of COVID. And then really, since the start of 2025, starting to see a significant downturn and then reach all-time lows in the end of 2025, and then now even lower moving into 2026 at 5.3% in March. And this is a real positive news story for York, given that some companies like Knight Frank, I think we've mentioned here, quoted the average UK high street vacancy levels being as high as 13.5%. That was back in Q3, but I think reports I've seen show that figure staying very much up at that level. So comparatively, York doing really well compared to the rest of the country on shop vacancy levels. Right, so now that brings us to the end of our section on performance insights, but we're just going to give you a quick summary of what we thought were the key takeaways from the points that we've mentioned today. So the first one to mention is that York's experienced a marked decline in consumer spending during Q1, which has primarily been driven by a reduction in customer volumes. The rate of decline is broadly in line with the UK benchmark, and it's likely due to some of, if not all of, the national economic challenges that we mentioned earlier in the webinar. The primary one being a reduction in spending due to customer confidence. Second thing to mention is food and drink sector. The food and drink sector remains the dominant contributor to city centre sales at around 37% of the total, and has proven to be the most resilient sector, outperforming the UK benchmark despite overall market stress. Put another way, food and drink is the biggest driver of sales in York City Centre. So businesses are in a position to, I suppose, cross-pollinate with food and drink, have the best opportunity of tapping into that benefit. But in contrast, retail and fashion, as two combined sectors, have recorded the most pronounced falls in sales during Q1 and are significantly underperforming against the UK benchmark. We know that online shopping plays a key role in the retail sector, and that there's a bigger picture there that isn't presented in the Beauclair data. At the start of 2026, the Office for National Statistics reported that around 28% of all retail spending is online at the moment. So I suppose businesses with the ability to diversify their offer across both bricks and mortar property, but also online, have the overall best chance of accessing customers in that regard. Then approximately 41% of total quarterly spend originates from residents within the York Local Authority area. However, this segment has shown a continued decline since 2024. So I suppose from a business perspective, incentivizing residents to visit your business could be a strategy for retaining some of that spend that we're losing and diverting it from competitors like out-of-town shopping centres, the likes of the Designer Outlet and Clifton Moor, those sorts of things. Footfall declined substantially in Q1, closely mirroring the downturn in sales seen in customer volumes from the Beauclair data. So not a great news story, but good to see that those two data sources are correlating. Then hotel occupancy has reached a record high for the Q1 period at 84%, a very different view of how York is performing, and that's 11.7% up year on year compared to 2025, which has potentially been supported by this price strategy of reducing their prices by around 4.5%. And yeah, again, perhaps opportunities for cross-pollination with the hotel sector could benefit businesses, working to attract visitors who might be staying in York but not visiting the high street and shopping whilst they're there. And finally, shop vacancy rates in York remain at a historic low and continue to sit well below the latest reported UK high street averages. This is a positive story for York in terms of demand, but also highlights that there is a shortage of commercial space for new businesses to move into. Okay, thank you very much for hearing me out on the latest insights. We're going to bring that section to a close, and I will stop sharing my slides. So I think we're ready to move on to the final two sections, which is a tour of the data hub. If you just bear with me. In the meantime, Rachel, do we have any burning questions in the chat which would be good to address now?
Yes, I think so, actually. So Chris Pegg has asked a great question just while we're talking about resident spend. We've obviously reported today that resident spend is tracking downwards and has done for some time. Do we have any data to suggest where residents are going? Do we hold data for out-of-town shopping centres and other places?
I suppose the answer to that is the easy answer is no, unfortunately. So Beauclair gives us a great this great ability to dissect sales in our area, but we don't have as granular insights for out of town. I mean, we do have like a normalized figure for out of town sales, and out of town, the three areas, I suppose the designer outlet, Clifton Moor, and I forget the name of the other one, but those three do tend to track higher than city centre sales, and that's a trend we've seen across the all of the historical data that despite even now out of town shopping is down in line with the UK benchmark, it's still always just a couple of percentage points ahead of the city centre, which I suppose maybe indicates that is a draw for local people, but something that I suppose we can do a bit more work on in trying to figure that out, because yes, at present we are reporting that resident spend is down, but we don't have a really comprehensive explanation for why. So sorry, I can't be more helpful on that one, Chris. And was there more questions now, or are we good to move into the next section?
No, I think we're good to move on. Just a reminder to everyone, if you do have any questions, please. Oh, Brian Littlejohn's just come through. If debit card spend, then customers could be utilising credit more given economic pressures. Yeah, if debit card spend is down, perhaps they're utilising credit spend more. Yeah, great point. So as Chris said, lots of different factors that could be contributing to it, and we can look to build up a broader picture of that in future. I think that is it for now. So yeah, just a reminder, if you do have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end of the session.
Okay, great stuff. So I think we are doing okay for time. Thank you very much for listening to the detail. We're now going to give you a tour of our exciting new data dashboard, or data web platform, as I should say, which is essentially, it's a free online resource available via the York BID website, which you're looking at right now. And that's designed to provide the business community, partners like yourselves, with clear and concise insights into York's economic performance. And this is something that you can access at any time. And much of it will mirror what you've seen previously in the presentation. So for the best user experience, we advise that you view the hub on a desktop computer, but it will work with a tablet or a phone if you so require. It you'll just need to bear in mind that the graphs and things will be much smaller and probably harder to read. To my mind, the data hub is structured into 3 tiers of complexity. So we're going to go through each of those tiers now and try and explain how you can benefit from it. So it will allow you to select the level that's most appropriate for the depth and granularity of the insight that you want to explore. So it's going to scroll down past the menu and straight on to the latest monthly insights. So this section shows 3 of what we believe are the most kind of valuable top line metrics for York City Centre for the most recent month. And you'll be familiar with the terminology. Sales, average revenue per customer, and footfall are the 3 that we've picked to give like a barometer of York City Centre's economic health. These metrics are accompanied by, in each data card, the year-on-year growth for that period compared to the previous year, and the UK benchmark for the spend. Unfortunately, we don't have a benchmark for the footfall at this time, but we do also have those views on a year-to-date basis. So for instance, if you look at the sales year-to-date, it's showing that between January and March, York generated £91.5 million worth of sales, which was actually a 5.2% reduction year-on-year compared to 2025, but relatively in line with the UK benchmark, which is down at 4.3%. Average revenue per customer is slightly up, in line with the UK benchmark, and footfall between January and March was down by 7.6%. So that's at a glance kind of health of the high street, which you can do very quickly. Tier 2, we have a variety of insights categories, which are organized into sections and presented in a similar fashion to how we've just demonstrated in the PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully these will be familiar to you and understand as we go, but we're going to start with the first section, which is spending insights. I'm going to use the jump to menu to go straight there because I know what I'm looking for. So first we've got an introduction to Beauclair. Here is a link to the Beauclair FAQ document, which includes lots of useful information like the terms of definition and how they define those sector categories. So you can just click on that and that should take you straight to the document, and all that information is in there. So please do use that if any of that is unclear. And then we've got this carousel of the 5 spending metrics. First for sales. So as before, we've got a period of 2024 to 2026 showing total monthly spend in York City Centre and the year-on-year growth on each month. If you can use the tooltip, if you hover over a column for any given month, it will tell you, the data associated with that period of time. So we can see sales in March 2026 were just over 33 million, and compared to December 2025, which was just over 52 million. Now, if I use the cursor to move along the carousel, then I can get a very similar view for customer numbers, for transactions, for average revenue per customer, and then for average transaction value. So this allows you to just look at that data at your leisure, and hopefully it's very clear what the changes are that are taking place over time. Then in a similar fashion, we've got more granular insights looking at specific sectors. This graph, underneath each graph, we've got an explanation of what you're looking at. So please refer to that if there's any confusion at all. So we've got the total spending across all of the 10 sector categories and the year-on-year growth. Again, you can hover over to see the total spend, but we've also got a slicer on this graph that allows you to look back at the historical data for that year. So we're looking at March currently, seeing that food and drink is down 11.3% in March, which is not a great story for that sector. But if we go back to February, this was less pronounced, a decline of 2.4%. So that's how that works. Again, if we use the carousel, we can look at all of the spending metric graphs that we saw previously, but with the slicer, which allows us to look at different sectors. So we can go to general retail, we can go to health and beauty and see all of the metrics, including transactions, customers, average revenue per customer, and average transaction value. And yes, The graphs may take a little time to load the first time that you open it, but once cookies are on your machine, they should load quite quickly, as you've seen on my machine here. Then we've got catchment insights, which is very similar, almost identical to the graphs that we showed you earlier in the presentation. So we have the monthly spending by York residents and the year-on-year growth. And then we have the share of sales across customers from different regions, this time in a monthly view rather than a quarterly one. So if I hover over York Unitary Authority customers for the month of March, I can see that they accounted for 13.6 million sales, which is equivalent to 41.2% of the total spend within that month. Then onto the visitor insights. Again, we've got an introduction to BT Active Intelligence and a view of the monthly footfall that we saw earlier. Scrolling across, we can look at the dwell time by month. And again, you've got a slicer so that you can look back at historical months for the current year. And then a couple of other graphs that you haven't seen yet, but peak hours of visitation. So this is the percentage share of visitors which are seen within any given hour of days of the week. We can observe that on Saturday afternoons, there's the highest density of visitors, which is what you'd expect at 1.4% of the total. And we can use, the slicer to change the monthly view to February or different months of the year. This graph shows a dissection of the total monthly visitors by demographics, so gender and age groups. So just as an example, we can see in the month of March that there was 6.6 thousand males over the age of 25 visiting York. And we can again use the slicer to look back at the historical data. Then finally, we've got the same introduction for hotel occupancy, the two graphs that we showed you earlier, occupancy rates and average day rate. And then finally, shop vacancy at the bottom here, showing you the monthly average rates for shop vacancy in York. Finally, there's a bit about the hub and links to our Insights archive, which Rachel mentioned earlier, which you can browse to see historical reports, but also the first webinar in the series. We'll continue to populate this with content as it's published. So I haven't yet mentioned the third and final tier, which is what we're referring to as the full report. This actually contains the entire library of insights and really some more dynamic views of the data, which we're going to give you a brief presentation on now. And so if I just click here, this will open. And I'm going to hand over to Dimitri from York Business School, who is actually the architect of this Power BI report, which is the engine behind the data hub. So he's going to talk you through how that works and how you can use that to best effect. So Dimitri, I think we can see you. Can we hear you?
I hope so. Thank you very much, Chris. Right, so we've given you a lot of stats today, and I think we're running out of time, so I'll try to make this brief. This is just the introduction to the report. The report combines all the graphs you've seen so far, and there are a couple more things, not too many, but this gives you just a broad overview of what's going on and a little bit more detail. So that's just the intro. Let's get to the next page, please. So these are the big insights that cut through what's going on in various sectors economically. We have one that is about specific sectors as well, but this one is just overall. And there are two slicers there that you can manipulate, so you can change the year or the month, which Chris is demonstrating here right now. But it looks like that in March, well, you've seen what the picture is. These are the same numbers. So looking at comparing to last year, for example, nothing seems to be going particularly well, but that's just what it is. We don't have hotel occupancy on this one, which was the outlier. Right, thank you, Chris. Shall we try the next one? And these are these insights year to date. So that is up to this month. The previous one was just this month, any given month. and this is the year up to this point. Again, you have the slicers there that you can use to change this to a month you're interested in. So it looks like March was a bit worse overall than the other months so far. So I don't know what was going on there. But the figures, if you compare them to the previous one, they're not as bad as the things were on the previous page. Let's move on to the next one. Thanks. You've seen this already, so it's just the same graph with monthly sales. Next one. And these two you've also seen already. They are on the website. Thanks. And these two. And these are the insights that are shown by a specific sector. So if you're interested in a specific sector, your organization is, for example, in food and drink, then you can see what's going on in that sector. And Chris has changed the slicer at the top to a different sector, so you can see how good things look in any given sector. And he's playing around with the slicers. You can do that as well in the report. Thanks for that. So Chris has shown you this graph. It's on the website. I'm not going to dwell on that. And this one as well. And these two, and just to remind you, they all have slicers for change in the sectors. So you're not stuck with food and drink. Thanks. Yep, you've seen this as well. Now this is a little bit more complicated. So there's a lot going on in this chart. If you hover over, you'll be able to see the tooltip that gives you all kinds of different information. Very briefly, this is a ribbon chart that shows you different the sales coming from different demographic segments. We have the link, the URL to Mosaic classification, and I think the plan is in the future, in the next one of the next webinars, we'll tell you a little bit more about this graph and what it's showing you. So there's a lot of information here. This just shows you the breakdown of sales by the different demographics in a given month. So it just breaks down the previous graph into just 1 month and how much each segment was contributing. Next one, please. Thanks. You've seen this. You've seen that as well. It's all on the website. And this one as well. So this is monthly footfall. We've shown you these two as well. They are on the website, and this one too. This is hotel occupancy. So you've seen the day rate as well. I think the graph is on the website. The one below is only specific to the report. That just shows you the occupancy rate per days of week in the last month that we've included. So that would be March. And this is the shop vacant. On the left, we have the shop vacancy here. You've seen this graph. It's on the web page. And on the right, we have the snapshot of comparison between York City Center and the high streets. We don't have the figure for the high streets in March, so we're showing you the latest one, which is Feb 2026, but you can see that the vacancy rate is much lower in York City Center than it is in the UK. So that is going great for York. And this is the glossary. We've got 3 pages of it. It just explains every term you'll see here. So if you get confused, just visit the glossary at the end. And the last one shows you the different places, so the different geographic areas that are included in this report. If they're mentioned, then this is the explanation of where they are. Thank you very much for this, Chris. And I think I'll hand it back to you.
Sorry, my mic and my video was off. Okay, thank you very much, Dimitri. Appreciate we've given you a very comprehensive view of what the Data Hub can show you. There's some repetition, but ultimately it's all live and available for you to use now. So great that we've used this opportunity to demonstrate that. And again, particular thanks to Dimitri, who has put in all the hard yards to develop that Power BI report, which is powering all of the other data assets that we have. So we're really pleased with how it's working. So I think we are very close to time, so it's probably pertinent for us to move on to if any audience members have questions. I think we may have had something in the chat, have we, Rach?
Yes, there's been quite a bit of discussion in the chat, actually, so thank you everyone for contributing. So we'll start with hopefully a straightforward question, but how is the region of residence determined? Is it the address the debit card is linked to? How can you tell where the spend has come from?
So because we have access to the account holder information via Beauclair, obviously we can't see individual account holders, but Beauclair does have access to the home location of those individuals and can summarize that data. So the definition that we've used is as close as we could get it to the York local authority area, so that boundary that's basically is governed by York City Council. It is on a postcode area basis, so there is a bit of overlap where postcodes don't quite match with the boundary, but we have put in a significant amount of effort into trying to get that as close as possible. And we've actually done that with all of the geo boundaries. So, when we've talked about East Yorkshire, North Yorkshire, the out of town shopping centres, all of those are geo boundaries that have to be drawn based on postcode area. So that's the process that we've gone through, and it can be a little bit tricky, but we're quite happy that it's as accurate as we can get it.
Great, and there's been another question about how the data is being used to drive bid forecasting in particular, future plans and incentives. These are issues that we need to tackle collaboratively, but we can see declines across all areas, and we assume that some strategizing comes next. Can you talk to that, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even without a doom and gloom outset, I think the BID has always attempted to plan its public events, projects that are draw for footfall and for booster spend at quieter times of year. So, for instance, we've just, through the January, February and March period, we've seen a succession of, like our colour and light installation at the Castle Museum, our Restaurant Week event aimed at supporting the hospitality sector, our Shop York campaign, which is targeted at supporting retailers. And all of those occur at times of the year where we've actually seen in the data that footfall is down, spending is down compared to other months. And it's outside of, I suppose, holiday times, outside of peak times, because, evidently York, when in the middle of summer, in the middle of Christmas or the festive trading period, is really busy, and there's probably, a critical mass of visitors that York can deal with. I appreciate in the current view, Restaurant Week took place in March, but admittedly we're looking at a reduction in sales in food and drink of 11%, which is really significant, which is suggesting that there are powerful forces at play here that are counteracting some of the work that we're actually doing on the ground. So in terms of our ability to sort of pull back York from some of these challenges, I may be slightly skeptical at present, but we are always driving our activity in that way, and we only ever really pitch our consumer facing events and projects at residents as well, just because it's easier to do than the marketing further afield, and there are partners in the city who do that already. So hopefully that's been helpful.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, absolutely, we don't want this data to just sit on our website. The whole point is that it's creating actionable data for the BID, for other city leaders, so that we can develop longer term strategies, and hopefully we can start to see some balance. As Chris has said, there are lots of things happening globally that does affect that, but we don't want this to just sit in the background. We will definitely be using this data to make decisions, and we hope that everyone on the call will be as well.
Yeah, very good point, Rach, what I failed to say.
We do have a few other questions. I appreciate that we're a little bit over time, so hopefully you can stay with us and we'll try to answer all of them. So do we have any information on what revenue comes in during events such as the Ice Trail designed to encourage visitors to York? I think you did touch on that briefly earlier. So through the BT active data, we can do specialist reporting. Is that right?
Yes, if you're referring to me, yeah. So we actually have done a bit of this bespoke reporting already for a couple of events that took place in 2025. We did it for the Christmas market. It depends what level of detail that you want to observe in terms of peak hours and the rest of it. But we can observe footfall at a daily level during events. So that is something that we can certainly do. It would be a request that we would put into the council for that data. And it makes sense to do that for the ice trail because that's a really key event earlier on in the year. Unfortunately, at a spending level, we aren't able to get any more granular with Beauclair than the monthly insights that we've shown you. I suppose the reason for that is because data is really expensive to purchase. So if we wanted something all singing, all dancing, like potentially like a visa platform, you're looking at more expenditure than the BID can afford to spend on projects like this on an annual basis. You know, potentially in the region of £50,000-60,000. I think I was quoted once upon a time. So the orientation that we've tried to take on data is the best value for reliability, which we feel that between BT and Beauclair we've managed to obtain. So it's a really great partnership between the BID and the council and the partners in that way.
I think you've probably answered a couple of the other questions, which are about is it possible to get credit card data? Is it possible to get non-UK spending? Am I right in saying that that's down to cost?
So
this data
no,
I think
at the bottom line, we have a finite amount of time and a finite amount of platforms to share this information with you. So we can't just saturate you with every bit of data that is out there. After the webinar, we're going to share a feedback survey, and we'd really appreciate your thoughts on what elements could improve our reporting, our webinar series, and then we will, if the data is out there, we will aim to get it and include it in the perspective that we show. For instance, there's a lot of free information on the Office for National Statistics, which we could tap into, but the reason we're running 5 minutes over is because we can't fit the data that we have into the time. So yeah, please do fill out that feedback form, and we will look to improve and streamline what we present to you moving forward.
And then probably finally, unless anybody wants to jump in, there has been a few comments on car parking. Which I think we probably expected. Do you have any comments on car parking, what data we hold, and what the BID has been doing around car parking?
I think, car parking is a really important topic for city centre businesses. It's all about accessibility, particularly affects retailers because, some of those larger items that you might purchase from a department store not as easy to travel with on the bus. It's likely that residents are going to be using those facilities more than tourists because you're not going to buy larger, more expensive items while you're traveling around. So I suppose we have been concerned, and we've been collecting feedback for quite a while now from businesses that the increasing car parking charges is concerning, and that it is going to have, whether it's a short-term or a long-term impact. Businesses are going to suffer at a bottom line as a result, and we're potentially seeing some of that already. I don't think we have a smoking gun in terms of saying that, yes, the data tells us that this is happening as a direct result of car parking charges, but it's something that we're certainly keeping an eye on, and I suppose looking out for those indicators that is the reason. There's probably a lot that we could cover in terms of car parking, but ultimately at present we don't have access to, I suppose, the direct revenue numbers which are held by the council. I think there's been a few issues in the past with getting access to that data, and whether it's fit for public consumption was the understanding that I took. But that's an avenue that we're going to continue down, and if we can do, then we will get access to them. But as you can appreciate, it's quite politically sensitive, and whether or not the council want to share that with us is another thing, because it will probably end up in a public forum like this. I don't know if that is a helpful response to the question, but that's certainly the situation we find ourselves in as a BID at the moment.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's something that we have discussed at length. We brought together a focus group of particularly independent businesses with members of the council, so that they could share their experiences on a more business-to-business basis in terms of how they felt it affected their sales. It is something that we are heavily involved in. Most meetings, I think, we talk about car parking, and it's something that we discuss quite a lot through the Tourism Advisory Board as well, which has representatives of the council. So we've got the right people together, and it's something that we are continuing to monitor. As Chris said, we don't have any specific data to say that there is a direct correlation, particularly because of global events. We've got the data for the national picture as well, and for the most part York is aligned with that. We've obviously seen some discrepancies there, but it's something that we are heavily invested in, and we know that businesses are concerned, so we will continue to be that voice for businesses at a local level. Okay, so I think that addresses most of the questions. As Chris said, there will be a survey to follow, so thank you. I think that wraps up the Q&A.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you very much, Dimitri. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for giving us your time. Look out for the email that will share the video of the session and the presentation slides, which I hope you'll find useful. Please do visit the Data Hub, explore what's there. Contact us directly if you're experiencing any difficulties or would like a more bespoke look at some of the data that sits behind it. We can present things in different ways, but just lastly to mention that our next webinar is planned for August 2026, and we hope you'll join us for that as well. So thank you very much, all the best, and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.